Hi there, friends. Welcome to episode 5 of Learn to Design, Then Knit. I'm Megan of the Unapologetic Knitter, and when I'm not creating videos like this, I'm a tech editor. So today we are going to be looking at how to create the shaping and instructions we need to follow to knit the sleeves of our summer raglan top. It took me 3 weeks to get back to this for many reasons. I am happy to report that I have completed all of my back yoke shaping and I'm about halfway done with the body. As the weather's turning nice and there's more social events, I've had a lot less time to knit than I kind of expected I would. But I want to make sure that we all stay on track and have a summer top ready as soon as we can. So today we're going to do a lot more math. Before we jump into the nitty-gritty of the numbers for this one, I would like to direct you to episode 46 of my podcast if you haven't already watched it. In that episode, I talk about adding short rows to the bottom of a yoked garment. Now, when we knit our back of our garment, we already took those short rows into account, but in that episode, I talk a little bit about what we're doing with the shaping and how it's going to play into the shape of our sleeves. I do my best to give you lots of visual diagrams in today's episode to hopefully cement the idea of what we're doing in terms of adding short rows to the back and not the front, but please don't hesitate to ask questions if you are struggling to understand today's concepts. It's a really big one. Even recording this episode took me far longer than I expected it to, mostly because trying to express what I know in visual concepts that may help someone doing this for the first time is a really challenging thing. So please don't feel frustrated if you watch this one time and go, what is she talking about? Perhaps give this episode a second or third watch if need be, because the concepts are really big. If you're still struggling, remember that we have a forum on Ravelry. There's going to be a link in the description below where you can ask questions and get clarification. I try to check in once or twice a week as my schedule allows to make sure that you aren't stuck for too long. At the top of that forum are instructions on how you can ear burn me if you don't feel like I'm responding quickly enough. So for the purposes of today's examples, we're going to be talking about constructing the left sleeve as worn. So it's going to be your left shoulder if someone was staring down at the top of you. But you're also going to transpose these instructions into your right sleeve. So there will not be a second video for the right sleeve. Just know that everything you do for the left sleeve, you're going to mirror and do for the right sleeve. So that will be the homework we'll set for this next few, probably 3 weeks. It's going to be 3 weeks before the next episode, is to get through both sleeves. So let's get down to it, look at all sorts of numbers and spreadsheets, and get you writing the instructions for your sleeves. This week, we have got several worksheets that we're going to look through to help understand all of the bits and pieces that are going to go into the shaping of our sleeves. I've drawn these out at the top of the page just so that we have a reference of left versus right as we create our sleeve shaping. And I'm going to assume that we understand that this is looking from the top down. This is the front of the garment, and this is the back of the garment. So we're going to go through several different sheets today, and if there is questions, we can always go over them either in the Ravelry forum or in the comments below this video. So, hearkening back to episode 4, I have reiterated my gauge at the top of the page just so that I have a reference, so that I'm not flipping back and forth too much. It looks just like the page from episode 4. Today we're going to be determining the number of stitches that we have at our cast on edge for each side of our sleeves, as well as the number of stitches that we have to increase to down the length of each sleeve, along with the total depth over which we have to increase these number of stitches. So we're going to work through this somewhat quicker than last episode because you've already done a lot of these steps. I'm just going to show you with my numbers one more time so you can use your own numbers. So first and foremost, we're going to be looking at the top of the shoulder width. This will be our cast on edge for both of our sleeves. And so we're going to go back to one of our original design documents where we determined what the width of our upper sleeve area was going to be. This is going to be the half width of your shoulder. So for me, my total shoulder width is going to be 2 inches because my half shoulder width was 1 inch. So I'm going to take my 2 inches and multiply it by my stitch gauge over 1 inch, and I get 10 stitches. Just like last time, because we're seaming these parts of the sleeves in, we're going to add a stitch at each edge, or 2 stitches total, and we get a total of 12 stitches. So in theory, my total cast on edge will be 12 stitches. However, if you remember from last week, I mentioned a preference for using an odd number of stitches, so I'm going to round that up to be 13. So now the total number of stitches that I cast on at the top of my sleeve to make up my 2 inches is going to be 13 stitches. We're going to use very similar math for the bottom of sleeve circumference. So one more time, I'll go back to my original garment layout and determine that my lower sleeve circumference will be 16 1/4 inches. So I'm going to multiply that 16.25 inches by my stitch gauge of 5 stitches over 1 inch, and I get a total of 81.25 stitches. Just like for the top of sleeve, we're going to add 2 stitches for our seam, which will bring me to 83.25 stitches. Obviously, I'm not going to knit 1/4 of a stitch, so I'm going to round that to say 83. Now we simply need to determine the total number of stitches that we need to increase down the length of the sleeve to reach our target circumference from our cast on edge. It's very simple math. We will take our 83 target stitches and subtract our 13 cast on stitches, and we determine that we have a total of 70 stitches that we need to increase over the entire length of the sleeve. Because we want to increase an even number of stitches down both edges of the sleeve, we're going to divide that total by 2, and we find out that we have to increase 35 stitches down each length of the sleeve. So we'll increase 35 on this side and 35 on this side for a total of 70. Because we decided to add our short row shaping to the bottom of our yoke, this shaping that I've shown here of the sleeves is somewhat inaccurate. I'm trying to give you a representation of what the sleeve would look like if we were knitting it without any short row shaping. But the actual fact is that our sleeves are going to be slightly shorter on the front, or our total yoke depth without any short rows, and slightly longer along our back edges, or the target yoke depth plus our short rows. These are numbers that we worked out in episode 4 when we worked out our total target yoke depth plus our total short row depth to determine our total yoke length in the back. So from that document, we're going to be creating a front of sleeve length and a back of sleeve length. It probably goes without saying, but just to clarify, this would be the front of your garment and this would be the back of your garment. So if we were looking top down at our garment laid out, this will be our left sleeve as worn with the short edge at the front, and this will be our right sleeve as worn with the short edge at the front. The longer edge is going to be at the back because this is the edge that we're seaming to the back of our garment where we worked our short rows. So with that information, we now need to work out 2 rates of shaping for our sleeves. We're going to have a rate of shaping for the front edge of our sleeves and a rate of shaping for the back edge of our sleeves. For the front of our sleeves, we know that we have to increase 35 stitches. We also know that from last week, we need to work our total yoke depth at the front to be, in my case, 96 rows. This is my 7 3/4 inch target length multiplied by my 12.5 rows per inch, which works out to be 96.9 rows. You may remember I rounded this to 97 because I'm going to start with an odd number or a wrong side row that will include no shaping. So from the numbers that we used last week, we will subtract 1 so we don't include that first wrong side setup row. So that leaves me with 96 rows over which to increase 35 stitches. Now here's where the math is going to be identical to last week. We need to determine our X rate of shaping and our Y rate of shaping. So we'll divide our total number of rows by the number of stitches that we're going to increase down one edge, and we get 2.74. If we round that up, our X interval is going to be 3, and if we round it down, our Y interval will be 2. So I worked through some math and said, okay, if I worked the 3-row interval 20 times, that will give me 60 rows. And if I worked the 2-row interval 15 times, because remember 35 minus 20 is 15, that would give me 30 rows. And I'm simply going to add those up to determine how many rows that is. That works out to be 90 rows. I need it to be 96, so I am 6 rows short. Because the difference between my interval of shaping is only 1, between 3 and 2, it's only 1, I know I need to work 6 more intervals at my 3-row shaping to get 78 rows, and then I will work 6 fewer intervals at the 2-row shaping, which gives me 18 rows. This works out to be a total of 96 rows, which is exactly our target. So now I know that down the front edge of my sleeve, remember the front edges adjacent to the front of the garment, I will have to work 26 3-row intervals and 9 2-row intervals. Because the back of our armholes, or pardon me, our sleeves are going to be longer because of this incorporation of the short rows, and we want to maximize the spacing over which to work those increases so that it matches the shape of the back of our garment, we're going to have to work out a separate set of numbers for the back edge of our sleeve. The math is going to be almost identical with one small adjustment. We will still have to increase 35 stitches, but we'll do it over 114 rows rather than 96. This 114 rows is our target back or yoke depth from last week, plus our short row depth. In my case, it was 18 rows of short rows, so I add that to my 96 to get 114. Okay, so once we divide this out, I determine that the number is 3 1/4. Rounded up will be 4, rounded down will be 3, and I'm going to go through the same process of determining how many rows I will achieve at different intervals. It turns out that down the back length of my sleeve, I will need to work 9 4-row intervals and 26 3-row intervals. I apologize. You can see the numbers here. How you decide to apply these is really up to you. I tend to do the higher rate of shaping at the top, followed by the lower rate of shaping, but it's up to you. Because the number of shaping rows is the same as the back, but the rate of shaping will be different from the back, you don't have to try to match the back specifically. But because on my back I worked at the closer shaping, so I worked at 2 rows and then 3 rows as I changed between my 2 rates of shaping down the back, I'm going to do the same. I'm going to work at my higher rate of shaping, which is 3 rows, followed by my lower rate of shaping, which is 4 rows. This will make more sense when I show you a spreadsheet in just a few moments. The last bit of math that we need to do has to do with figuring out our spacing for the short rows. As I've discussed in my particular garment, this is going to differ for you. I have 18 rows of short row shaping, but what we need to do is figure out over those 18 rows how many turning points we're going to have and how many stitches to have between each one of those turning points. So our total number of short rows is going to be the key indicator of how many turning points we will have in each sleeve. To determine our number of turning points, how many times we're going to work across, turn, and come back, we're simply going to divide our total number of short rows, in my case that's 18, by 2, which means I will have 9 turning points per sleeve. To figure out the spacing between each turning point, we have to do a little bit of math. But I think we should look at a spreadsheet of how I approach spacing my increases down the length of my sleeve before we come to this, because a visual aid is going to make a lot more sense. So here's a spreadsheet that I want to share with you, and as I look at this, I can't tell you how many times I printed this out to make sure it was as clear as possible. I've discovered that this is incorrect. That is a copy paste. This will be your right sleeve. Okay, so what you're looking at here is a spreadsheet that I created. If you have Microsoft Excel, you can use that. If you would like to use Google Spreadsheets, you can use that. You can even write this out on a lined piece of paper or a piece of graph paper. And you don't even have to go through this process if you can visualize it differently. But this gives me a really clear visual representation of how the shaping is going to go. So we're going to focus on this left sleeve as worn. So just as a quick refresher, this is my sketch of the left sleeve as worn. The front of the garment is going to be at this front edge. The back of the garment will be at the back edge. Now, this would be as worn. My head would be right here if I was looking top down at myself. What we want to do to visualize this is rotate this sleeve so that we can think about it in terms of the direction that we knit. We will knit on the right side in this direction and purl on the wrong side back the opposite way. Our front edge or our leading edge is the short edge, and our left edge is the back edge of our sleeve. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the left sleeve as worn, front edge, and back edge. So what I've done, now that I have figured out my front edge shaping, remember these intervals of 2 and 3 rows, and my back edge shaping, which has intervals of 4 and 3 rows, I physically drew this all out. So this won't all fit on the screen, but I'm just going to pan down so you can see that I have actually written out all of the rows that I would need to knit my sleeve. You can see here that a couple of things are happening. So my front sleeve edge has to end after 96 rows, and my back sleeve edge has to end after 114 rows. This gray area is the short rows, where we are not working the sleeve or the rows all the way to the edge of the sleeve in both cases. When we work our short rows, because we want our back edge to be longer, we will knit a short row out and come back. We will not work all the way to the edge of the row. So this is all of our short rows coming from the back edge or the long edge of the sleeve, while the front edge does not get worked. So what we want to look at while we are doing this, not only does this visually show us how all of our increased rows are going to line up, but it also shows us where our short rows need to begin. So let's try to put these two documents side by side so we can see how they correlate. If I cover up this back edge and focus only on the front edge first, we can see how the numbers relate to one another. In this front edge shaping box that we calculated at the start of this video, I know that I will have 26 repeats of 3-row shaping and 9 repeats of 2-row shaping. I mentioned that I like to do my higher rate of shaping at the top, so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 rows of 2 interval shaping. Each space here between each increase is a knit even row. Unfortunately, the grid lines didn't print on this, but if you were to line this up, row 15 would be an increase row, and row 16 is a knit even row. There's no increase that has to occur. So following these 9 repeats of the 2-row intervals, we then move into all of the intervals of 3-row shaping down the front edge of my sleeve. So that is all of our front edge shaping. If we do the same thing using our back edge shaping, I've got 26, oh boy, that's out of frame there. Sorry about that. We've got 26 repeats of 3-row shaping all the way down till we get to this point here at row 76. And then we transition into our 4-row shaping, which has to happen 9 times. All of that has to be done by row 114. So ignoring these short row information right here, what this does is give me a roadmap of all of the rows that I have to work down the length of my yoke at the appropriate spacing. You'll have some rows, like for example row 1, where we have an increase at the front edge and the back edge of the sleeve on the same row. But when we come down to row 3, we will have an increase at the start of the row, but not at the end of the row. It will be a knit even at the other edge of the work. To look at this visually, what I mean is we've got right side rows. We would have an increase here on the same row on row 1. On row 2, we have a knit even. On row 3 at the front edge, we have an increase, but at the end of the row, we have it even. There's no increase. On the next row, which is a wrong side row, I would have an increase at the left edge or the long edge. And at the start of the row, or I guess technically the end when the wrong side is facing you, it's knit even. There's no increase. So this roadmap here is really going to show you how to make sure that all of your increases happen up to the correct number of rows that you need it to happen over. You can simplify this by finding the pattern throughout here and writing it into a Word document if that's easier. But for me, this is just a really fast way for me to be knitting the rows and checking off each one as I go. So now that we have a rough idea of how to lay out our spacing for the front and back edges of our yoke, let's take a look at the short rows and how you can help interpret, or how I can help you interpret this information here. So we determined in last episode that we're going to have a specific number of rows for our short rows. In my case, that is 18 rows of short rows. When we take a look at the schematic of our left sleeve as worn, our front edge is shorter, our back edge is longer, and the difference between the two edges is 18 rows, or the number of rows equivalent for your short row length. When we are working our left sleeve, the short row shaping needs to be added to the back, which is the left edge of the sleeve when the right side is facing up. Because when we're working this sleeve, our right side rows go from right to left, and our wrong side rows go from left to right, because we need to add the short rows or the extra length to the left side of our sleeve, our first short row turning point will be on a wrong side row. That means that these wrong side rows for 18 rows will not touch the front edge of our sleeve. What that looks like when we break it down into our spreadsheet is this gray area. It's kind of a knot area, or an area where stitches do not get counted, or rows do not get counted at the front edge. This gray area where we don't count those rows at the front edge is the same as the total number of short rows. So there are 18 rows here that do not get counted at the front edge. These short rows here are counted and numbered in tandem with the rows where they begin. Because our first short row needs to begin on a wrong side row, and we need to have 2 rows at the bottom at the very least that are not considered part of the short rows, we're going to start at row 94 for our short rows. This is a wrong side row. Because we're starting our short rows on a wrong side row, our final short row will be a right side row, which will end at the left edge. That means our resolution row, where we resolve all of our short rows, is also going to be a wrong side row. Since we want to have at least 2 rows worked at the very end that are not short rows or resolution short rows, Sorry about that, I hit my camera. We want to make sure that we have 1, 2, 3 rows at the bottom, 1, 2, 3 rows at the bottom, where we work the final front edge rows of our sleeve. So this diagram is probably slightly misleading because I show the short rows as coming right to the corner. Once we complete our short rows, we will actually work 3 additional rows past them. And those 3 additional rows will be incorporated in our 97 rows, or our target yoke length, whatever that is for you at your row gauge. So now that we've plotted out all of our spacing based on our intervals of shaping and used up all the total rows of our back edge and front edge of our sleeve, we can go back and figure out how to determine the rate of shaping for our short rows. As we've determined, we're going to have 9 turning points across the entire width of our sleeve, and we know that we need to have a total number of stitches at the bottom of our sleeve. That is our target number. For me, that's 83. Just going back a moment, that 83 is the full target width at the bottom of your sleeve. So that's my starting point. So with 83 stitches as our target at the bottom of the sleeve, we need to take out the number of stitches that we use for our raglan. This raglan number of stitches is going to differ for everybody. In my design, I like to have 2 raglan stitches at each edge before I have my in pattern stitches, plus there is my seaming stitch. So in all, I've got 6 stitches at each, total 3 stitches at each edge of my garment that are going to be considered raglan or seaming stitches. So my total width is 83. I subtract the 6 stitches that I use for my raglan and seaming columns, and I end up with 77. So this 77 is the number of stitches we have to work our short rows. But when we look at our spreadsheet of where those increases occur, we also need to take out any increases that may happen after the short rows are complete. Because I have 2 increases that occur after all of the short rows are done, I'm going to subtract that as well. So we determined that I would have 77 stitches once I removed my 6 raglan stitches. I'm now going to subtract 2 for those 2 increased stitches that are not going to be available to work short rows over, and I end up with 75. So this number is a very key number. The next thing we need to do is take that number and divide it by the total number of turning points plus 1. That 1 is because we want to have even stitches on each side of our turning points that are not considered short rows. So we would have 10 sections of even with 9 turning points between. I hope that makes sense. So we're going to divide our total number of stitches by our number of turning points plus 1, which means I've got 75 stitches with 10 spaces or 10 intervals, and that gives me 7.5. Because we can't knit half of a stitch, we'll round that down to 7. What that means is my interval of spacing is going to be 7 stitches. Anytime I turn, there will be 7 stitches between each turning point. However, on short row 1, we're going to omit, this is our turning point, omit a specific number of stitches. This number of stitches is your spacing, which for me is 7, plus my raglan or seaming stitches, which was 3. We mentioned this up above. So my first short row, when I work across the row before I have my first turn, it'll be my spacing plus my raglan, which is 10 for me. On short row 2, we're going to work all the way to the end of the row. I'm going to give you a visual demonstration of what this looks like here in a moment. Beginning on short row 3, that's when we're going to work our turning point at our interval of spacing. Short row 4 will once again be working to the end, and then we'll repeat these rows the required number of times for your number of short rows. Now, I'm not going to dictate to you what method of short row shaping you need to use. I'm going to use German short rows for my garment. You can use wrap and turn, or Japanese short rows, or twin stitch short rows, whatever method you like. Just be sure that this spacing that you work out is taken into account for your method of shaping. So let's take a look at one more very long document to get a sense of what this would look like physically if you're knitting it. So when I say a long document, I mean it. I have physically charted out all of the stitches across my sleeve so you can get a sense of what should be happening. This is our front edge of the sleeve. You can see here that across the bottom I have numbered all of my stitches from 1 all the way through to 83, which is my target number of stitches. I don't think you need to do this for your garment. I just wanted to show you how I'm checking my short rows to make sure the spacing is accurate. So in column 1, you can see I've graded out, except up at the very top here. This orange I is my final increase that gets worked after all of the short rows are complete at the front edge of my sleeve. If I go to the opposite edge of my chart, you can see I've done the same thing. Forgive me here as I try to get these all situated. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 increases that get worked within the short row box. So here's 1, 2, 3, and 4. And this final I is this last increase at the long edge of the sleeve that is worked outside of the short rows. So that is my final and 5th increase on this edge. Okay, so we'll try to go through this quickly so you can see how it makes sense in tandem with the instructions I just shared with you. I'll try to stack these so we can see them side by side. Okay, so here we go. So on short row 1, which we've determined has to be a wrong side row, meaning I'm coming from the left edge of my sleeve, this very bottom dashed line here is going to be short row 1. And we are going to work all the way across the row in pattern until we get to the last 10 stitches. So there'll be 10 stitches that you don't work. That's when I'm going to turn and work my first turning point. In my case, it's a double stitch because I'm working the German short row method. If you do wrap and turn, that's fine. That's all these purple rows are indicating, is my turning point method. So now that we have stopped 10 stitches unworked at this edge, we're not going to touch these 10 stitches until we get to our resolution row. So those will stay 10 unworked to the right of this double stitch the whole way through. We're then going to, so we work that double stitch and then we're going to work in pattern all the way back across the row, all the way to the end of the row. There is no stopping or turning point here. This is the very end of your sleeve stitches because remember, we're building up the length at this edge only. So for me and my rate of shaping, short row 3 will begin with an increase at the very edge, and then I'm going to work across all the way until I get to 6 stitches before the previous DS, or the double stitch. Now you may be saying to me, Megan, you said your spacing was 7 stitches, not 6, and you're absolutely right. But for the double stitch method, the first stitch that I'm going to count is the DS. That is 1 stitch, and then I need 6 more to make 7. So I will knit until 6 stitches before the DS because that is my 7th stitch. Then I'm going to work my second DS at the edge of those 6 stitches and turn and work back across my row. Now, I don't want to be completely redundant. We're going to be doing the same thing over and over again, working back and forth from the long edge where we work to the very edge of the row, continuing to turn at our interval of shaping until we have worked all 9 turning points. There we go. If I zoomed out enough, you can see I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 turning points, and I have 10 spaces. This is the 9 plus 1, or the number of short row turning points plus 1. So we have got 1 space, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10. That's why we add the 1 to our turning points to figure out our spacing, because we want to have 10 spaces where we have even stitches between our turning points. If we were to omit that +1, we may end up with our final turning point being far too close to an edge, and we'd like to avoid that. So this is the most equitable way to space your short rows across the entire width of your sleeve. Now, if we go back one more time to our chart of all of the increases, because our first short row was a wrong side row and we work an even number, our final short row is going to be a right side row. So here is short row 18 right here, and we turned at this DS and worked back to the edge. Oh, you can't see my hand. My hand is out of the screen. We worked to the end of the row. So our first full row is going to be our resolution row, and it's going to be a wrong side row. What I mean by resolution is we're going to resolve any of our short rows as we work back to the right edge. So our final increase at this left edge is going to be our I right here, and then we're going to work in pattern all the way across the row, and at each turning point we will resolve, that's why I've used an R, each one of our turning points. So if you use the wrap and turn method, this is going to be the lift and knit together, or purl together, I guess, because it's a wrong side row. Because it's DS, I will just purl my 2 legs of my stitch together. So I will knit even until I reach it, resolve it. Knit even across these unworked stitches from the previous turn, and resolve my next DS. So we're going to be resolving them all the way as we get across the row. And finally, we will end at the very end of the work again, because we're going to have worked all of our unworked stitches up to the end of the row. Now I have 2 final rows to work as rows 95 and 96 for the front edge, and rows 113 and 114 for the left edge. Because I have 1 increase left, I will work that right here, and that is my 83rd stitch. That column is no longer gray, and I'll just work all the way to the end without any short rows, and all the way back to here, so that I end with my final wrong side row, and that is my 96th front row and my 114th back row. So it's really important to remember that our sleeves are going to be mirrors of one another. Perhaps this is not the right diagram to show you. Let's take a look at this diagram, which more accurately shows the shaping of our sleeves. One more time, if this was your head and we were looking straight down, this is going to be your left sleeve as worn versus your right sleeve as worn. So when we worked our left sleeve, our leading edge, or our right edge, was our short edge, and our left edge was our back edge and was longer. When we rotate this and begin to work the right sleeve as worn, everything is going to be reversed. We're still going to be knitting on the right side from right to left and purling on the wrong side from left to right, but we need to have the back edge as our leading edge and our front edge as our ending edge, or our left edge. So when we work the spreadsheet, if you decide to go this way, keep in mind that everything is going to be mirrored. You can see here that I have my first short row as a wrong side row for my left sleeve. My first short row for the right side is going, or the right sleeve is going to be a right side row. So we will have 1 fewer row to work at the bottom of the right sleeve than we do for the left sleeve. This is just how it has to work out because the 2 shapes are mirrored. So remember that you're going to be working your short rows the opposite direction as you did for the left sleeve on the right sleeve. So expect your instructions to be mirrored. Once you have completed all of the raglan shaping in your yoke and you've worked through your total target number of rows for the front and back sides of your sleeve, it's time to add in your ribbing for the sleeves. In my case, I'm going to do about 1 inch of 1x1 ribbing, and I'm simply going to knit this past the end of the yoke. You may find it helpful to clip a locking marker into your work after you've completed each row or your final rows of your sleeve, so that you know where your seaming for the raglan stops and your seaming for the underarm, which is essentially just the little piece of your cuff, is going to start and stop. That's one thing that I forgot to mention in last week's video, and I apologize for that. When I completed all of my raglan shaping, I clipped a little locking marker to the edge of the work. So we can see I've got my cast on edge, here's my raglan shaping, and here is my little locking marker. Although I feel like the shaping between the angle of your raglan and the vertical edge of your body is pretty obvious, it doesn't hurt to have that little visual reminder so that we know where we're starting and stopping the seams of our raglan versus where we're starting the seams for our underarm or the underside of our sleeve and the sides of our body. Those are going to be seams that we work separately when we complete construction of the garment, so we want to make sure we have a clear stopping and starting point. If your pattern is such that you can very clearly tell where those end, you probably don't have to worry about the markers too much. But for me, because my fabric is so stretchy and manipulatable, I wanted to make sure that I knew exactly where those 114 rows ended for the yoke and where the 175 rows for the body begins. Okay, folks, that's where I think I'm going to leave it for today. I haven't made the spreadsheets that I show you in this video available for public use, but if you feel like they would be helpful for you, please leave a comment in the description below, or in the description. What am I saying? Please leave a comment in the comments below. Let me know if seeing those in the actual format that I wrote them in would be useful to you, and I can provide links for you to download that so you can input your own numbers. So as we head into these warmer weeks and summer events and school ending and all the things that we've got going on, I hope you're still finding time to work on your garment and get some of the knitting done. We'll come back in about 3 weeks and start looking at working on the front of our sweater, short sleeve, top, whatever you want to call it. And as you may have already guessed, there's going to be even more math than there was today. Maybe. It might be a little simpler. Anyway, thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you're having fun, and we'll see you in a couple weeks. Okay. Happy knitting!